The monitoring section of the console has different options that affect the monitor outputs for both stage musicians, like your aux outputs, and also your headphone out or your cue wedge if you're using this console as a monitor desk. So let's talk about what some of these do. Now each section, you notice there's a little arrow here, and that basically takes that section and blows it up and gives you a few more options here. So we'll go ahead and start with the top one, the cue, which is your headphone output, or you can select another output if you're using this console for a monitor desk. The first option here is your cue mode. What this does is it tells the console what to do if you queue up multiple outputs at the same time. So mix cue, what this does is if you select multiple outputs, it lets you hear all the outputs that you have selected. Last cue basically lets you only hear the last output that you selected. So that's probably more useful if you're doing monitors on this console, because when you queue up the next mix, you don't want to hear the previous mix as well. You just want to hear the one mix that you queued up. The next section here contains input, DCA, and output options. So on your inputs, when you queue up an input, PFL is pre-fader listen. So this is great for troubleshooting if you want to hear the signal before the fader without having it turned up in the house. You also have a trim level here, which can be really useful if something's really hot, you have a really hot signal and the fader's down. You can turn PFL trim down some and it won't blow you away. AFL is your after fade listen. So that means that it's kind of like a solo in place, and that when you solo it up or you cue it up in your headphones, it'll be whatever level it is in the house. So the fader does affect it. And then post pan here actually lets the panning of the channel be heard in your headphones. All right, in your DCA section, you have pre-pan and post-pan, which just lets you decide if you want to hear your panning or not when you queue up a DCA. You also have a unity here. So that basically makes it so that when you queue up a DCA, you're hearing that group at unity. So the fader is not affecting it. It's kind of like a pre-fader listen on your DCAs. You also have your output here. You have pre-fader and after fader when you queue up your outputs, and then you also have your pre-fader listen trim as well. And then over here you just have a clear cue, so that just clears anything you have queued up. The next section is your monitor section. We'll go ahead and expand this section. Up here in the top left, you have your source select. So this is what is feeding the monitor output of the console and your headphone output when you have nothing queued up. So your stereo left-right is probably your default option here. You might make it your mono, your LCR, or you can actually define the monitor source if you don't have anything queued up. You can choose any of your mixes, matrix, or your stereo stuff here, which is also up here, so it's kind of redundant. So we'll turn this back on. All right, next we have monitor fader. Basically, what this does is it makes your main fader of your console on the far right control your monitor output. So if you're using this console as a monitor desk, you might do that. So if you hit mode, it changes to stereo, so that the stereo fader controls your monitor levels, or mono, or you can hit none. And then you also have a manual control here, so you can turn your monitor fader level up or down here. Over here, you have your phone's level link. So basically what this does is if you're using it as a monitor desk, and let's say you have the stereo fader controlling your monitor level, it also controls your headphone level as well as your monitor output, which you can assign, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. Now here you have mono monitor, and that turns your headphone and your monitor output into a mono signal. So if you're queuing up a stereo mix and you just have a wedge, for instance, that you're monitoring from, you probably want to use mono monitor there. And then you have your output here, just turns that on and off. You have a dimmer, and this, you turn the dimmer on and off, and what this does is it dims the monitor level. So you set your amount here, you can use your knobs to turn this down, and then when you turn this on, it turns your monitor down whatever level you have set here. So in this case, 32 dB. You also have your talkback dimmer here, which is really useful for your aux mixes when you're using them for a monitor desk. But basically what this does is when you're using the talkback mic, it turns everyone's mixes down so that they can hear you clearly. So you set the level of attenuation here. So if you have it at negative 22, when you use the talkback mic, it turns their monitor down 22 dB. The next setting here is monitor delay. Now this is really useful when you're using this console at front of house and you're out in front of your PA. You can turn this on, and then you can turn up your delay here. Now if you can read this, it says feet, so 75 feet. So if you're 75 feet from your speakers, you set this delay, and now when you put your headphones on, you don't get this really echoey thing going on because sound travels so slow that you'll hear the sound in your headphones long before you'll hear it from the PA. So this fixes this problem. Definitely a useful feature to have going on there. Now over here is where you patch your monitor outputs. So this is especially useful when you're using this console as a monitor desk. You click here and then you can select whatever Omni out, the 2-track out, or if you have cards in the slots, you can select those as well. So you tell it where you want your monitor output to go. So when you solo something up, that's where it would go to. The next section is the oscillator section. Go ahead and bring that up. Here you can control what kind of tone or noise you want. So sine wave is just a pure tone. When this is selected, you have your level, which is just your volume, and your frequency. And then you have pink noise or burst noise. These are just noise generators. And over here you have output, and this is where you turn it on and off, and then you have to assign it to outputs. So I'll turn that off. I can assign it to my different mixes. So if I just want to make sure that my packs are working before the band shows up, I could assign the oscillator to these outputs and then turn it on and turn it back off. So that's how the oscillator works. Great for testing things to make sure they work before the band shows up. Bottom section is your talkback section. Here you can send phantom power for your talkback mic if you need that. You also have the ability to select any input on the console to be your talkback mic. So if you want to use something other than the talkback input on the front of the console, you can plug it into the back of the console and select it here. You have your talkback on here to turn your talkback on and off. You can also set up a user-defined key to do that, which makes things a little faster. And then here you assign the outputs that you want your talkback to go to when it's on. So you probably want to select all of your in-ear mixes, maybe the backstage, a wedge. So that way when you're using your talkback, that's where it's going. But of course you probably wouldn't want that in the house unless you're doing sound check, and you might. The Sends on Fader feature is a great feature for doing monitors from this console. This allows you to simply select the mix here, and it puts it on the fader so you can control the levels of each channel in that mix. You can also select a matrix and use a matrix as a mix as well if you need more mixes for your band. And you can put them on the faders as well here.